The scream that tore from Tessa Thornton's throat as the rope snapped beneath her boots would haunt the men working below for years to come. But it was the strong arm that shot out and caught her wrist that changed everything in that single heartbeat of terror. Dangling 70 feet above the jagged rocks of the granite quarry, her body swinging wildly as loose stone cascaded down the cliff face, Tessa looked up into the most intense blue eyes she had ever seen. Belonging to a cowboy she had never met who now held her entire life in his calloused hand. "I have got you," the stranger said, his voice steady despite the strain evident in every muscle of his sun-bronzed arm. "Do not look down. Look at me." Tessa's heart hammered so violently she thought it might burst through her ribcage. The spring morning of 1883 had started like any other brutal day at the quarry outside Gila Bend, Arizona, where she had been working for 3 months, since her father's death left her with debts she could never hope to repay on a seamstress's wages. Foreman Dutch Keller had discovered that a desperate woman would do dangerous work for half the pay of a man, and he had been exploiting that knowledge with increasing cruelty ever since. "Please," she gasped, her fingers digging into the cowboy's wrist as her other hand scrabbled uselessly against the smooth rock face. "I am pulling you up," he said, and she felt herself rising inch by agonizing inch. His other hand appeared, gripping her forearm now, and with a grunt of effort he hauled her up and over the edge of the narrow platform where he had been standing. They collapsed together onto the wooden planking, both breathing hard, her body pressed against his as she trembled uncontrollably. "What in the hell are you doing up here?" he demanded, pulling back to look at her properly. He was young, perhaps 25 to her 21 years, with dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his worn hat, and a face that would have been handsome if not for the fury currently blazing across it. "This platform is not secured. I was coming up to fix it when I saw you climbing." Before Tessa could answer, a bellow from below made them both look down. Dutch Keller stood at the base of the cliff, his thick neck red with anger, his barrel chest heaving as he shouted up at them. "Thornton, get back to work. I did not give you permission to stop." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "That man sent you up here." Tessa nodded, still unable to find her voice. Her entire body shook with the aftermath of adrenaline, and tears burned hot behind her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. She had learned in the past 3 months that crying only made Dutch worse. "Stay here," the cowboy commanded, rising to his feet with a fluid grace that spoke of years in the saddle. He moved to the edge of the platform and called down, "This platform is unsafe. It nearly killed her." "That is not your concern, Easton," Dutch shouted back. "You are here to build supports for the new equipment, not to interfere with my workers." Easton. So that was his name. Tessa watched as he turned back to her, his expression softening slightly as he took in her pale face and shaking hands. He crouched beside her and spoke in a gentler tone. "Can you climb down on your own, or do you need help?" "I can manage," she whispered, though she was not at all certain that was true. Her legs felt like water. "I am going to go down first," Easton said. "I will be right below you the whole way. If you slip, I will catch you again." "Do you understand?" She nodded, grateful beyond words for this stranger's unexpected kindness. Most of the men at the quarry had watched Dutch's treatment of her with either indifference or approval, glad that someone else was taking the most dangerous jobs. This man was different. The climb down was a nightmare of loose handholds and crumbling rock, but true to his word, Easton stayed close enough that she could hear his steady breathing and feel the reassurance of his presence. When her boots finally touched solid ground, her knees nearly buckled with relief. Dutch was waiting for them, his face twisted with anger. He was a large man, gone soft around the middle but still powerful, with mean little eyes and a mouth that seemed permanently set in a sneer. "Get to the crusher, Thornton. You have wasted enough time." "No," Easton said flatly. The single word hung in the air between them like a thrown gauntlet. Dutch's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What did you say to me?" I said no. Easton moved to stand between Tessa and the foreman, his posture deceptively relaxed but ready. "That platform is rotted through. It would not have held another 5 minutes. You sent her up there knowing it was unsafe." "She is paid to do what I tell her," Dutch snarled. "And you are paid to mind your own business. Your contract is to build equipment supports, nothing more. You have no authority over my workers." "Then I am making it my business." Easton's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath the quiet words. "She is not going back up there, and she is not working the crusher either. That machine should have been shut down yesterday after it nearly took Morrison's hand off." Tessa's breath caught. She had not realized this cowboy had been paying such close attention to the quarry's operations. He had only arrived 3 days ago, brought in by the owner to construct new support structures for the expanded operations. But apparently those sharp blue eyes had seen more than she thought possible. Dutch stepped forward, using his size to intimidate. "You want to get paid for the work you came here to do, Easton. Then you will keep your mouth shut and let me run my quarry. Otherwise you can pack your tools and ride out of here today." "This is not your quarry," Easton said quietly. "It belongs to Samuel Bridger, and I am guessing he does not know you are running it like this. Does he know you are using unsafe equipment? Does he know you have got a woman working jobs that violate every safety standard I have ever heard of?" "Bridger is in Tucson," Dutch said with a nasty smile. "He left me in charge, and what I say goes. Now get out of my way before I have the boys throw you out." Several of the quarry workers had gathered around during the confrontation, their faces showing various degrees of interest and unease. Tessa recognized most of them. They were hard men doing hard work, and while few of them had actively helped her, neither had they gone out of their way to make her life more difficult. They simply wanted to collect their pay and go home at the end of each brutal day. Easton looked at Dutch for a long moment, then turned to Tessa. "Do you have somewhere safe to go? Family? Friends?" She shook her head, hating the admission. "I have debts. I need this work." "How much do you owe?" The question surprised her. "I do not see how that is relevant. How much?" He repeated more gently this time. $230, she said quietly. "My father owed money to several people in town when he passed. They said I have to pay it back or they will take our house." Dutch laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You see, she is stuck here and she knows it. Now both of you get to work before I dock your pay for the time you have wasted arguing with me." Easton was quiet for a moment, and Tessa could almost see him thinking, weighing options. Finally he said, "I will pay off her debts." The words fell like stones into a still pond, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Tessa stared at him in disbelief. "You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious." He looked at Dutch. "I will pay her debts today if you release her from employment immediately. She can work for me instead." "Doing what?" Dutch demanded suspiciously. "I need someone to manage my supplies, keep track of materials, handle correspondence with Bridger about the project. There is plenty of work that does not involve climbing rotten platforms or operating dangerous machinery." It was a lie, or at least a significant exaggeration. Tessa could see that in the slight tightness around Easton's eyes, but she could also see he meant every word about paying her debts. The offer was so unexpected, so impossibly generous that she could not quite process it. "Why?" she asked. "You do not even know me." He met her gaze directly. "Because what I just saw should not happen to anyone. Because I watched my sister die in a factory accident back in Missouri when I was 16 years old, killed by an owner who cared more about production than safety. Because I can afford to help, and because it is the right thing to do." The rawness in his voice when he mentioned his sister told Tessa everything she needed to know about his sincerity. This was not some elaborate scheme or an attempt to buy her gratitude for unsavory purposes. This was a man who had been scarred by tragedy and could not stand by and watch history repeat itself. "I cannot possibly repay you," she said. "Work for me at fair wages, and we will call it even." He turned back to Dutch. "Do we have an agreement?" Dutch's face had gone an ugly shade of purple. "You think you can just waltz in here and start making demands? Fine. Take her. But when Bridger hears about this, when he hears that you are interfering with operations and driving up costs by insisting on ridiculous safety measures, you will be out on your ear. And she will be back here begging for her job." "We will see about that," Easton said calmly. He extended his hand to Tessa. "Come on, let us get you somewhere safe, and then we will go settle those debts." Tessa looked at his offered hand for a long moment. Accepting it meant stepping into the unknown, placing her trust in a man she had met less than an hour ago. But staying meant continuing to risk her life every day for a man who would not hesitate to let her die if it saved him a few dollars. The choice, when she really considered it, was not difficult at all. She placed her hand in his and let him lead her away from the quarry. The ride into Gila Bend took 20 minutes on Easton's horse, a sturdy bay gelding with kind eyes and an easy gait. Tessa sat behind him, acutely aware of his warmth and solidity, still processing everything that had just happened. He had not spoken much since they left, seemingly content to let her gather her thoughts. The town itself was small but growing, benefiting from its position along the stagecoach route between Yuma and Tucson. The main street featured a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a hotel, and various other businesses that catered to travelers and locals alike. Tessa had lived here her entire life, watching it transform from a tiny settlement to something approaching a real town. Easton guided his horse to the bank first, where he dismounted and helped her down with easy courtesy. Inside, he spoke quietly with the banker, a thin man named Horace Webb, who had been one of her father's creditors. Money changed hands, papers were signed, and just like that, the debt that had been crushing her for months simply disappeared. They visited 2 more creditors after that, settling accounts at the general store and with a private moneylender who had charged her father usurious interest. By the time they finished, the sun was high overhead, and Tessa felt as if she were walking in a dream. "I do not know what to say," she said as they stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the mercantile. "Thank you seems entirely inadequate." Easton settled his hat more firmly on his head, squinting slightly in the bright sunlight. "You do not need to say anything. I meant what I told Dutch. You will work for me at fair wages, and we will consider the debt settled." He paused, then added, "I have a small house on the property where I am staying, about a mile from the quarry. It belonged to the previous foreman before Bridger moved operations and brought in Dutch. You can stay there if you want somewhere safer than the boarding house near the quarry." "Is that appropriate?" Tessa asked carefully. She was grateful for his help, but she was also acutely aware of how such an arrangement might look to others. "The house has 2 bedrooms and a lock on each door," Easton said matter-of-factly. "I will take one room, you take the other. Anyone who wants to make something improper out of that arrangement can take it up with me directly." His tone suggested that would be an unwise decision on their part. Tessa considered this. She had been living in a drafty room at the Quarry boarding house, sharing space with 3 other workers and constantly fending off unwanted attention from men who saw her as easy prey. A house with locks and a man who had already proven himself trustworthy sounded like paradise by comparison. "All right," she agreed. "Thank you, again." This time he smiled, a brief flash of warmth that transformed his serious face. "You are welcome. Now, I am guessing you have not eaten much today. There is a restaurant down the street that makes decent food. My treat." Over plates of beef stew and fresh bread, Tessa learned more about the man who had saved her life. Keaton Easton came from Missouri originally, as he had mentioned, and had spent the last 7 years working as a traveling carpenter and engineer. He specialized in building structures for mines and quarries, skills he had learned from his father before the older man died in a mining accident. The death of his sister had made him particular about safety, sometimes to the point of conflict with employers who saw his concerns as expensive nuisances. "I have been fired from 3 jobs in the past 2 years," he admitted, mopping up stew with a piece of bread. "Turns out most owners do not appreciate being told their operations are death traps. But you keep doing it anyway," Tessa said. "Someone has to." He met her eyes across the table. "I have seen too many good people die because someone decided their lives were worth less than profits. After my sister died, I swore I would never stay quiet about unsafe conditions again, no matter what it cost me." "That is very noble," Tessa said softly, "but it must be difficult always fighting that battle. Some things are worth fighting for." He pushed his empty plate aside. "What about you? How did you end up working at the quarry? That cannot have been your first choice of employment." So Tessa told him about her father, a gambler and dreamer who had always been convinced the next card game or business venture would make their fortune. She told him about the mounting debts, the increasingly desperate schemes, and finally the heart attack that had taken him 6 months ago, leaving her with nothing but obligations she had never agreed to. She had tried to make it work as a seamstress, her original trade, but the money came too slowly and the creditors were too impatient. "Dutch heard I was desperate and made me an offer," she said. "He promised the work would be simple, just sorting stones and helping with lighter tasks. But once I was there and he saw I had no other options, the jobs got more dangerous. Every time I objected, he threatened to fire me and tell the creditors I was refusing to pay. I was trapped." "You are not trapped anymore," Keaton said firmly. "Those debts are settled and you work for me now. Dutch Keller has no power over you. What happens when Mr. Bridger finds out what you did? Dutch was right that you were hired for a specific job, not to manage workers or interfere with operations." Keaton leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Samuel Bridger is a businessman, but from what I have heard, he is also a reasonable man. Once I explain the situation and show him the documentation I have been keeping on safety violations, I think he will see things my way. And if he does not, well, I have been fired before. I will survive." His casual acceptance of potential consequences on her behalf made something warm bloom in Tessa's chest. She was not accustomed to people taking risks for her. Her father had loved her in his way, but he had always been focused on his own schemes, his own dreams. The men at the quarry had ignored her struggles. Even the women in town, who should have been sympathetic, had largely kept their distance, uncomfortable with her unwomanly employment. But this stranger, this cowboy who had appeared out of nowhere, was willing to risk his livelihood simply because it was the right thing to do. She found herself studying his face as he signaled for the check, taking in the strong lines of his jaw, the slight crook in his nose that suggested it had been broken at least once, the calluses on his hands that spoke of hard physical labor. He was undeniably attractive, but more than that, he had an air of competence and quiet strength that made her feel safe for the first time in months. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her staring. She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Just that I am very fortunate you happened to be there this morning. Fortunate for both of us," he said. "If I had been 5 minutes later—" He did not finish the sentence, but the shadow that crossed his face told her he was imagining what would have happened if that rope had snapped when no one was close enough to catch her. They collected Tessa's few belongings from the boarding house, where the landlady barely looked up from her knitting as Tessa settled her account. The woman had never been friendly, viewing Tessa with the same disdain most respectable women showed toward those who did unfeminine work. It was a relief to walk away from that place for the last time. The house Keaton had mentioned was better than Tessa expected. It was a small adobe structure with a red tile roof, built in the Spanish style that was common in the territory. Inside, it was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and sturdy furniture. The 2 bedrooms were separated by a common living area and kitchen, providing both privacy and propriety. The previous foreman lived here with his wife until Bridger relocated him to the Tucson office, Keaton explained, setting her bag down in the smaller bedroom. "It has been empty for about 6 months. I have been staying here while I work on the project, but I have mostly just used one room and the kitchen. Feel free to make it more comfortable however you want." Tessa looked around the space that would be hers, taking in the narrow bed with its clean linens, the simple dresser, the window that looked out toward distant mountains. It was not much, but it was more than she had dared hope for just a few hours ago. "This is perfect," she said. "Thank you, Keaton, for everything," he nodded, then seemed to realize something. "I have been so busy dealing with everything else I never actually asked your full name. I heard Dutch call you Thornton." "Tessa Thornton," she said, extending her hand formally. "It is very nice to meet you properly, even if the circumstances were a bit dramatic." He took her hand, his grip warm and firm. "The pleasure is mine, Miss Thornton, and I apologize for the dramatic circumstances. Tomorrow will be much calmer, I promise." But tomorrow proved to be anything but calm. Tessa woke to the sound of angry voices and the thunder of approaching horses. She dressed quickly in one of her simple work dresses, braiding her long auburn hair with practiced efficiency, before hurrying out to the main room. Keaton was already at the door, still pulling on his shirt, his expression alert and wary. "Stay inside," he said without looking at her. "This might get ugly." Through the window, Tessa could see Dutch Keller riding up with 4 other men, all of them armed. Her heart sank. She had known Dutch would not take yesterday's confrontation well, but she had hoped he would at least wait a few days before retaliating. Keaton stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Tessa moved to the window where she could hear the conversation. "You made a big mistake, Easton," Dutch called from his horse. "A very big mistake." "I do not see it that way," Keaton replied calmly. "Now get off my property before I have you removed." Dutch laughed, ugly and harsh. "Your property? This house belongs to Bridger, same as everything else around here. And I am the foreman of this quarry, which means I have authority over all operations and personnel." "You had authority over Miss Thornton," Keaton corrected. "Past tense. She no longer works for you, which means you have no reason to be here." One of the other men spoke up, a lean character with a scarred face that Tessa recognized as Mac Porter, Dutch's second in command at the quarry. "We came to deliver a message from the boys. They do not appreciate outsiders stirring up trouble. Makes everyone look bad, complaining about working conditions and such. If the working conditions were not worth complaining about, there would be no trouble," Keaton said. "Maybe you should take that message back to the boys." Dutch dismounted, moving closer to Keaton with deliberate menace. "Here is what is going to happen. You are going to finish the work you were contracted for, keeping your mouth shut and your nose out of my business. And your little pet project in there is going to come back to work at the quarry where she belongs. Neither of those things is going to happen, Keaton said flatly. Now leave. Tessa saw Dutch's hand move toward the gun at his hip, and her heart stopped. But before he could draw, Keaton's hand shot out and caught his wrist in an iron grip. "Do not," Keaton said, his voice deadly quiet. "You are already in enough trouble without adding assault to the list. Because make no mistake, Dutch, I have been documenting every safety violation at that quarry since I arrived. Rotten platforms, malfunctioning equipment, workers forced to operate machinery without proper training or protection. I have dates, times, and names. If anything happens to me or Miss Thornton, all of that documentation goes straight to Samuel Bridger and the territorial authorities." Dutch tried to pull his hand free, but Keaton held firm. The other men on horseback shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting this level of resistance. "You are bluffing," Dutch snarled. "Try me," Keaton said. He released Dutch's wrist with a sharp movement that sent the bigger man stumbling back a step. "Go back to the quarry, do your job, and stay away from Miss Thornton, or you will discover exactly how serious I am about those safety reports." For a long moment, the tension hung thick in the morning air. Then Dutch spat in the dirt at Keaton's feet and climbed back on his horse. "This is not over," he promised. "Bridger will be back from Tucson in 2 weeks. We will see what he has to say about your interference then." "I look forward to it," Keaton said. Dutch wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. Tessa waited until they were out of sight before rushing outside. "Are you all right?" she demanded. "He was going to shoot you." "No, he was thinking about it," Keaton corrected. "But he is not stupid enough to actually do it. Too many witnesses, and he knows I've got documentation that would destroy him if anything suspicious happened." He turned to face her, and she saw the anger burning in his blue eyes, though his voice remained steady. "I am sorry you had to see that. But he needed to understand that intimidation will not work here." "Those safety reports you mentioned," Tessa said, "are they real?" "Every word." He gestured for her to follow him back inside. "I make it a practice to document everything when I work a job like this. Started doing it after the 3rd time I got fired for speaking up about unsafe conditions. Having written evidence makes it much harder for owners to dismiss concerns as the complaints of a troublemaker." Inside, he retrieved a leather portfolio from his bedroom and showed her page after page of careful observations, sketches of faulty equipment, notes on close calls and actual injuries. It was meticulous work, the kind of documentation that could make or break a legal case. "This is incredibly thorough," Tessa said, impressed despite her worry. "How do you find time to do all this while also completing your actual work?" "I do not sleep much," he admitted, "and I am very efficient with my time." He closed the portfolio and set it aside. "The question is what we do now. Dutch is not going to let this go, and we have 2 weeks until Bridger returns. That is 2 weeks for him to make trouble, possibly turn other workers against us, maybe even sabotage my work to make me look incompetent." Tessa thought for a moment. "What if we did not wait for Mr. Bridger to come back? What if we went to him in Tucson?" Keaton raised his eyebrows. "That is a 3-day ride, assuming good weather and no complications. And Bridger is a busy man. There is no guarantee he would see us. But if he did see us, if we could show him your documentation and explain what has been happening at the quarry, he might act immediately instead of waiting until he returns. It would give Dutch less time to cause problems." "It is risky," Keaton said slowly, but she could see he was considering it. "If we leave the quarry for that long, Dutch could claim I abandoned my contract, and traveling alone together for 3 days, even for legitimate business reasons, could damage your reputation." Tessa almost laughed at that. My reputation has been in tatters since I started working at the quarry. Respectable women do not do manual labor alongside rough men. I stopped worrying about what people thought months ago. Still, Keaton said, I will not put you in a position that makes your life harder than it already has been. What if we found someone to travel with us? A chaperone of sorts, someone whose presence would prevent any improper speculation. Who did you have in mind? He considered this. There is a woman in town, Mrs. Clara Vasquez. She is a widow who runs a boarding house, very respectable. I have heard she sometimes travels to Tucson to visit her daughter. Maybe she would be willing to make the trip if we covered her expenses. It took them most of the morning to make the arrangements, but by early afternoon they had succeeded in convincing Mrs. Vasquez to accompany them. She was a practical woman in her 50s, weathered by the harsh Arizona sun, but with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. When Keaton explained the situation, carefully edited to protect Tessa's privacy, Mrs. Vasquez had agreed immediately. That Dutch Keller has always been trouble, she said firmly. My late husband worked at the quarry before his heart gave out, and he used to come home with stories about dangerous conditions and corners being cut. If you are trying to get Mr. Bridger to do something about it, I am happy to help. They departed early the next morning, Keaton and Tessa on his bay gelding, and Mrs. Vasquez on a steady mare borrowed from the livery. The ride to Tucson would take them through some of the harshest desert terrain in the territory, but it was spring, which meant the temperatures were manageable and water sources were relatively reliable. The first day passed without incident. They made good time, stopping twice to rest the horses and once for a simple lunch of dried beef and hardtack. Keaton proved to be an easy traveling companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories from his years on the road. Mrs. Vasquez rode a short distance behind them, giving them enough privacy for conversation, but maintaining her chaperone duties with quiet efficiency. Have you always been a carpenter? Tessa asked as they rode through a landscape of saguaro cactus and rocky outcroppings. My father was a builder, so I learned the trade young, Keaton said. But I have done a bit of everything over the years. Ranch work, freight hauling, even tried prospecting for a while. Nothing stuck until I started specializing in construction for mining operations. Turns out there is good money in being willing to work in remote locations and handle complicated projects. Do you ever miss Missouri, having a permanent home? He was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. But after my sister died and then my father a few years later, there was not much holding me there. My mother remarried and moved to St. Louis. I see her once a year or so, but we are not particularly close. Home is wherever I happen to be working, I suppose. There was a loneliness in his words that resonated with Tessa's own experience. She had spent her whole life in Gila Bend, but she had never felt truly rooted there, especially after her mother died when she was 12. Her father had loved her but had been too caught up in his schemes to provide real stability. In some ways, she and Keaton were both adrift, looking for something solid to hold on to. What about you? He asked. If you could do anything, go anywhere, what would you choose? It was a question no one had ever asked her before. Tessa thought about it as they rode, watching the landscape shift and change around them. I would want to open a dress shop, she said finally. Not just doing alterations and basic sewing, but creating original designs. I have always loved beautiful clothes, the way fabric can transform into something elegant and special. But that takes capital and connections, neither of which I have ever had. You are a talented seamstress, then. I like to think so. My mother taught me when I was young, and I have been sewing since I was old enough to hold a needle. But there is not much market for fancy dresses in Gila Bend. Most people just need practical work clothes. Tucson is bigger, Keaton said thoughtfully. More wealthy families, more social events that would require the kind of clothes you are talking about. If you were serious about starting a business, that might be the place to do it. The idea sent a little thrill through Tessa, though she tried not to let herself hope too much. That would require money I do not have. Not as much as you might think. A small space, basic supplies, a few sample pieces to show your work. If you are as good as you say, word of mouth would bring in customers. He glanced at her, and something warm in his expression made her breath catch. I am not saying it would be easy, but it is not impossible either, especially if you had someone willing to help you get started. You have already helped me more than I have any right to expect, Tessa said softly. Maybe I want to help more. The words hung between them, loaded with meaning that went beyond simple charity. Tessa felt heat rise in her cheeks and looked away, suddenly very aware of how close they were riding, of the solid warmth of his body behind her on the horse. Mrs. Vasquez chose that moment to call out, "We should start looking for a place to camp for the night. The horses need rest." They found a suitable spot near a small spring, sheltered by rock formations that would provide some protection from wind and wandering eyes. Keaton set up a simple camp while Tessa and Mrs. Vasquez prepared a meal of beans and bacon. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, they sat around a small fire and talked about inconsequential things. But later, after Mrs. Vasquez had retired to her bedroll and Tessa was preparing to do the same, Keaton caught her hand gently. "I meant what I said earlier," he told her quietly. "About helping you start over, build something of your own. You have had a rough time and you deserve better." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Tessa asked, searching his face in the firelight. "Please do not misunderstand. I am grateful beyond words, but I need to know why. What do you want from me?" He looked at her for a long moment, his blue eyes serious and intent. "Honestly, I do not know yet. When I pulled you off that platform, I was not thinking past saving your life. And then, when I learned what Dutch had been doing to you, I just knew I could not walk away. But somewhere between yesterday morning and right now, it became about more than just doing the right thing." "What do you mean?" "I mean that I find myself very interested in your dreams about a dress shop. I find myself wanting to know everything about you, what you like and what you fear and what makes you laugh. I find myself looking for excuses to be near you, to make you smile." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know the timing is terrible and the circumstances are complicated, but I would be lying if I said I did not feel something when I look at you." Tessa's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must be able to hear it. "I feel it too," she admitted. "And you are right, the timing is terrible. 2 days ago I was still trying to figure out how to survive week to week, and now suddenly everything has changed. My head is spinning." "Then we will take it slow," Keaton said. "No pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other and seeing where things lead. Does that sound all right?" It sounded more than all right. It sounded like the first truly hopeful thing Tessa had heard in longer than she could remember. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and was rewarded with one of his rare smiles. "Good," he said. "Now get some rest. We have another long day of riding tomorrow." But sleep was a long time coming as Tessa lay in her bedroll, staring up at the stars and trying to process the tumultuous emotions swirling through her. Just 2 days ago, her life had been desperate and frightening, each day a struggle to survive until the next. Now she was riding through the desert with a man who made her feel safe and valued, heading toward a meeting that might change everything. It was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. The second day of travel was harder. The terrain grew rougher, forcing them to pick their way carefully through rocky passes and sandy washes. The temperature climbed as the sun rose higher, and even with regular water stops, both riders and horses began to show signs of fatigue. Around midday, they encountered their first real problem. A small group of men blocked the trail ahead, rough-looking characters with the kind of hard eyes that suggested they were not interested in friendly conversation. Keaton immediately guided his horse in front of Tessa's, his hand moving casually but deliberately to the rifle secured to his saddle. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called out pleasantly. "We are just passing through on our way to Tucson. Do not want any trouble." The leader of the group, a heavy-set man with a thick black beard, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "That is good to hear. We do not want trouble either, but there is a toll for using this trail. $10 per person ought to cover it." "This is public land," Keaton said mildly. "There is no toll." "There is now." The man's hand rested on his gun, a clear threat. Mrs. Vasquez had gone very still on her horse, her face pale but composed. Tessa felt her stomach clench with fear, but she forced herself to remain calm. Panicking would only make things worse. Keaton seemed to be weighing his options, calculating odds. There were 4 men against his one, and even though Tessa knew he was armed, a gunfight would put both women at serious risk. $10 per person is steep," Keaton said slowly. "How about we compromise? $5 total for the group, and we will be on our way with no hard feelings." The bearded man laughed. "I do not think you understand how this works, friend. We are not negotiating. Actually, I think you are the one who does not understand." Keaton's voice had gone hard and flat. "You see that dust cloud about a mile back? That is a cavalry patrol out of Fort Lowell. They have been behind us since this morning, heading to Tucson on the same route. Now, you can let us pass peacefully and be gone before they get here. Or you can try to rob us and explain to a very interested Army lieutenant why you are operating a fake toll station on public land." All 4 men turned to look at the horizon behind them, and sure enough, there was a faint cloud of dust in the distance that could indeed be approaching riders. Tessa had no idea if Keaton was telling the truth about cavalry, but his confidence was utterly convincing. The bearded man cursed and spat again. "This is not worth the trouble. Move out, boys." He glared at Keaton as his group began to disperse. "You are lucky today, friend. Real lucky." "Luck has nothing to do with it," Keaton said calmly. "I just pay attention." They waited until the would-be robbers were completely out of sight before continuing. Mrs. Vasquez let out a shaky breath. "Was that really cavalry?" she asked. Keaton smiled slightly. "I have absolutely no idea, but they believed it might be, and that was enough." He glanced back at Tessa. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands were trembling slightly. "You were very calm. Being calm is usually the best way to handle dangerous situations. Panic just makes things worse." He urged his horse forward. "We should keep moving. Whether that was cavalry or not, I would rather put some distance between us and those men." They made camp that night in a sheltered canyon, building their fire in a depression that would hide the light from anyone passing on the trail. The encounter with the would-be robbers had left everyone a bit shaken, and the conversation around the fire was subdued. After Mrs. Vasquez had retired, Tessa found herself sitting beside Keaton as he checked and cleaned his weapons, a nightly ritual she was learning he took very seriously. "Where did you learn to handle situations like today?" she asked quietly. "Experience, mostly. I have been traveling alone through rough country for years. You learn to read people, to understand when someone is really dangerous and when they are just trying to scare you into compliance." He finished with his rifle and moved on to his pistol, his movements precise and practiced. "The trick is to always have an exit strategy, always be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, and never, ever let them see that you are afraid." "Were you afraid today?" Tessa asked. He met her eyes, and the honesty in his gaze made her heart skip. Terrified, not for myself but for you and Mrs. Vasquez. If things had gone wrong, if they had not believed my bluff about the cavalry, I would have had to make some very hard choices very quickly. Would you have fought them? If I had to, yes, but I am glad it did not come to that. Fighting is always a last resort, no matter how good you are with weapons. There are no winners in a gunfight, just survivors. Tessa thought about this, about the casual violence that seemed to be part of life in the territory. She had grown up hearing stories about bandits and outlaws, shootings and robberies, but those had always seemed distant, things that happened to other people. Today had been a sharp reminder that danger was never as far away as she liked to think. "Thank you for protecting us," she said softly. Keaton set his pistol aside and turned to face her fully. "You do not need to thank me for that. Keeping you safe is not a burden, Tessa. It is a privilege." The intensity in his voice sent warmth flooding through her. Without quite meaning to, she leaned closer, drawn by something she could not name. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I know I said we would take this slow," he murmured. "But I have been thinking about kissing you since yesterday." "Then why have you not?" The boldness of her own words surprised Tessa, but she did not take them back. "Because I wanted to be sure you wanted it too." "I do," she whispered. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, one hand cupping her face while the other rested lightly on her waist. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses men at the quarry had occasionally tried to steal. This was different, careful, and respectful, a question rather than a demand. Tessa felt something in her chest expand and unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. When they broke apart, both were breathing a bit harder. Keaton rested his forehead against hers, a slight smile curving his lips. "I have been wanting to do that since I pulled you off that platform," he admitted. "Really?" Tessa was simultaneously thrilled and incredulous, while I was screaming and terrified. Not during, obviously. But after, when you looked at me with those big brown eyes and trusted me to get you down safely, something just clicked in my chest. He pulled back slightly to meet her gaze. "I know this is all happening fast. Too fast, probably, but I cannot shake the feeling that meeting you was meant to happen." "I feel the same way," Tessa confessed. "It is strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once." "Welcome to my entire experience of the past 2 days," Keaton said with a wry smile. Then he grew more serious. "But I mean what I said about taking this at whatever pace you need. Just because I have feelings does not mean you are obligated to return them or act on your own feelings before you are ready." "I know," Tessa said, "and I appreciate that more than I can say. But Keaton, I am ready to explore this, whatever this is. You have given me back my life, my hope for a future. The least I can do is be honest about my feelings." "Then be honest," he said quietly. "What are you feeling right now?" Tessa thought about how to put the swirling emotions into words. "I feel safe with you, which is something I have not felt in a long time. I feel valued, like my thoughts and dreams matter. And I feel this pull toward you like gravity, drawing me closer every time we talk. It is not just gratitude, though I am grateful. It is something deeper than that." "That is how I feel too," Keaton said. "Like I have been wandering around incomplete, and suddenly here you are, fitting into the empty spaces I did not even know were there." They sat together for a while longer, talking quietly about hopes and dreams, about the past and the possible future. By the time Tessa finally made her way to her bedroll, the fear from the earlier encounter had faded, replaced by a glowing warmth that had everything to do with the man watching over their camp. They reached Tucson late on the 3rd day, tired and dusty, but intact. The city was significantly larger than Gila Bend, with proper streets and adobe buildings painted in cheerful colors. Mrs. Vasquez directed them to a respectable hotel where they secured 3 rooms, all on the same floor to maintain propriety. "I will visit my daughter tomorrow and give you time to conduct your business with Mr. Bridger," Mrs. Vasquez said as they parted ways in the hotel hallway. "But Keaton, you take good care of this girl. She has been through enough." "Yes, madam," Keaton said seriously. "You have my word." After washing off the trail dust and changing into their least rumpled clothes, Keaton and Tessa made their way to the address they had been given for Samuel Bridger's Tucson office. It was a substantial building near the center of town, 3 stories of brick and glass that spoke of serious commercial success. The secretary, a pinch-faced man with spectacles, looked them over with obvious skepticism. "Mr. Bridger is a very busy man. Do you have an appointment?" "No, but this is urgent business regarding his quarry operations in Gila Bend," Keaton said firmly. "I am the engineer he contracted for the equipment support project, and I have information he will want to see immediately." The secretary sniffed. "Mr. Bridger does not see people without appointments, particularly not people who show up covered in trail dust making dramatic claims." "Then I will wait here until he has time," Keaton said, settling into one of the office chairs with clear determination. "However long that takes. And while I wait, perhaps I will discuss those equipment safety violations with anyone else who happens to be in the waiting room. I imagine your other clients would be very interested to hear about working conditions at Bridger operations." The secretary's face went through several interesting color changes before he finally stood up. "Wait here. I will see if Mr. Bridger has a moment." He disappeared into the back office, and Tessa heard raised voices, though she could not make out words. After several minutes, the secretary returned looking sour. "Mr. Bridger will see you now, but make it quick." Samuel Bridger was a man in his early 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of deep tan that came from years working outdoors before success had moved him primarily behind a desk. He stood as they entered, his expression cautious but not unfriendly. "Mr. Easton, I presume." "I received a telegram from Dutch Keller saying you were interfering with operations and had abandoned your contract. I was planning to send someone to investigate when I returned to Gila Bend next week." His gaze shifted to Tessa. "And you are Tessa Thornton, sir?" "I was working at the quarry until Mr. Easton removed me from dangerous conditions." Bridger's eyebrows rose. "Dangerous conditions? That is a serious accusation. Perhaps you had better explain, Mr. Easton." Keaton opened his portfolio and began laying out his documentation, page after careful page of observations, sketches, and notes. As he talked, Bridger's expression grew increasingly grim. He asked pointed questions, examined the evidence closely, and listened to Tessa's account of her own experiences with calm attention. "Dutch sent Miss Thornton up on a rotten platform that collapsed while she was on it," Keaton said bluntly. "I happened to catch her before she fell 70 feet to her death. If I had been 5 minutes later, you would be dealing with a fatality on your property and quite possibly a legal investigation." Bridger sat back heavily in his chair. "I hired Dutch because he came with good references and promised to increase production efficiency. I had no idea he was cutting corners on safety to do it. He has also been exploiting Miss Thornton's financial desperation to force her into increasingly dangerous work at reduced wages," Keaton added. "I paid off her debts and removed her from the situation before something tragic happened." "You paid off her debts?" Bridger looked startled. "That was generous of you." "It was the right thing to do," Keaton said simply. "But now Dutch is angry and threatening retaliation. We came to Tucson to bring this information to you directly, before he has time to further sabotage operations or falsify records. Bridger was quiet for a long moment, studying the documentation spread across his desk. Finally, he looked up at them both. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention, though I wish I had known sooner. Mr. Easton, you did not abandon your contract. You prevented a catastrophe and quite possibly saved my company from a very expensive lawsuit." He turned to Tessa. "Miss Thornton, I am very sorry for what you experienced at my quarry. Dutch Keller was hired to manage operations, not to exploit vulnerable workers. That is unacceptable." "What will you do about him?" Tessa asked quietly. "I will be returning to Gila Bend tomorrow instead of next week," Bridger said grimly. "And Dutch Keller will be looking for new employment by tomorrow evening. I do not tolerate this kind of behavior from my managers." He looked at Keaton. "I would like to offer you the foreman position if you are interested. You clearly have the skills and, more importantly, the integrity for the job." Keaton hesitated. "That is a generous offer, sir, and I appreciate your confidence, but I am not sure I am the right person to run a quarry long-term. My skills are more suited to building projects and temporary contracts." "What if the job came with significant authority to implement proper safety measures and overhaul procedures, and a salary that would allow you to pursue other ventures during slow periods?" Tessa saw Keaton's expression shift as he considered this. It was clear that Bridger's offer was substantial, the kind of opportunity that did not come along often. "Could I have some time to think about it?" Keaton asked. "Of course. I will be at the quarry for at least a week, assessing operations and making changes. Give me your answer before I return to Tucson." Bridger stood and extended his hand. "In the meantime, thank you again for your integrity. There are not many men who would risk their livelihood to protect someone else." As they left the office and walked back toward the hotel, Tessa was quiet, processing everything that had happened. The meeting had gone better than she had dared hope. Dutch would be removed from his position, the quarry would be made safer, and Keaton had been offered a significant opportunity. Everything was working out, so why did she feel a cold knot of worry in her stomach? "You are thinking very loudly," Keaton said as they navigated the busy street. "What is wrong?" "If you take that job, you will be staying in Gila Bend permanently," Tessa said slowly. "Running the quarry, dealing with all the responsibilities that come with it. Is that really what you want?" "I do not know," he admitted. "A week ago, I would have said absolutely not. I like moving around, taking on different projects, not being tied to one place. But that was before I met you." "You cannot make a decision like that based on me," Tessa protested. "We have known each other for less than a week." "I know." He stopped walking and turned to face her, oblivious to the people flowing around them on the sidewalk. "But in that week, you have become the most important thing in my life. I know that sounds dramatic and probably foolish, but it is the truth. So yes, the question of what I want is now completely tangled up with the question of what would be best for us. What do you think would be best?" Tessa asked softly. "Honestly, I think we should stay in Tucson." The statement caught her completely off guard. "What? Think about it," Keaton said, his eyes bright with sudden enthusiasm. "Bridger made good money on his operations, enough to start over somewhere else. You want to open a dress shop. This is the perfect city for it. I could take contract work, building projects that let me travel but always come home to you. We would not be stuck in Gila Bend with all those memories and all those people who treated you badly." "You are talking about starting a life together," Tessa said, her heart racing. "We have not even discussed anything that serious yet." "I know, and maybe I am getting ahead of myself," Keaton acknowledged. "But I have never been more certain of anything than I am about wanting a future with you. So yes, I am talking about starting a life together, if that is what you want too." Tessa looked at him, This man who had dropped into her life like a lightning bolt and changed everything. A week ago she had been desperate and alone, counting down the days until Dutch's cruelty or the quarry's dangers finally killed her. Now she was standing on a street in Tucson, being offered a future she had never dared to imagine. "I want that too," she said quietly. More than I knew it was possible to want anything. The smile that broke across Keaton's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He pulled her close, heedless of propriety or the curious looks from passers-by, and kissed her right there on the busy street. "Then let us do it," he said when they finally broke apart. "Let us build something real, something that is ours. We will find you a shop space, get you set up with the supplies you need. I will take Bridger's offer on one condition, that he lets me hire and train a replacement foreman over the next few months while we transition to Tucson. I can do contract work for him from here, building projects that need specialized skills. It will work, Tessa. I know it will." His confidence was infectious, and for the first time Tessa allowed herself to truly hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope she had clung to while working at the quarry, but something solid and real, rooted in the strength of the man beside her and the possibilities stretching out before them. They returned to Gila Bend with Samuel Bridger 2 days later, Mrs. Vasquez accompanying them with stories of her lovely visit with her daughter and grandchildren. Dutch Keller was dismissed that very afternoon, his protests and threats falling on deaf ears as Bridger made clear that any further interference would result in legal action. The workers at the quarry, freed from Dutch's tyranny, proved far more receptive to Keaton's safety measures than anyone expected. Over the following months, Keaton worked to implement comprehensive reforms at the quarry while simultaneously training his replacement, a thoughtful man named William Chen, who shared Keaton's commitment to worker safety. Tessa, meanwhile, began preparing for the move to Tucson, selling her father's house and using the proceeds along with money saved from her wages working for Keaton to begin assembling what she would need for her shop. They were married in late summer, a simple ceremony in Tucson with Mrs. Vasquez and Samuel Bridger as witnesses. Tessa wore a dress she had made herself, cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery that showcased her skills. Keaton wore his best suit and could not stop smiling the entire day. "I never thought I would have this," Tessa said that evening as they sat on the porch of the small house they had rented in Tucson. "A real home, a husband who loves me, a chance to build the life I always dreamed about." "You deserve all of it and more," Keaton said, pulling her close. "You survived things that would have broken most people. You are the strongest person I know." "I had help," Tessa reminded him. "A cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time." "Not a cowboy," Keaton corrected with a smile. "Just a carpenter with decent reflexes and a stubborn streak." "My carpenter," Tessa said, kissing him softly. "My hero. My love." Tessa's dress shop opened 6 months after their wedding in a small but well-located space on a street that catered to Tucson's more affluent residents. She had spent weeks preparing, creating sample pieces that showcased her skills and designing a simple but elegant interior that made the most of the limited space. Keaton had built all her display fixtures himself, beautiful pieces of carpentry that perfectly complemented her work. The first day was nerve-wracking. Tessa stood behind her counter, hands clasped together to hide their trembling, watching the street outside and wondering if anyone would actually come in. Keaton had promised to stop by during his lunch break from the construction project he was currently managing, but that was hours away. The bell over the door chimed at 10 o'clock, and a well-dressed woman swept in, her critical gaze taking in everything at once. Tessa recognized her as Mrs. Sarah Hartford, wife of one of Tucson's wealthiest merchants. "Good morning," Tessa said, hoping her voice sounded more confident than she felt. "Welcome to Thornton Designs. Please let me know if I can help you with anything, Mrs. Hartford examined the display pieces with the kind of careful attention that suggested real interest rather than idle curiosity. She paused at a walking dress in deep blue wool with intricate beadwork along the collar and cuffs, running her fingers over the fabric. "Did you make this yourself?" she asked. "Yes, madam. Every piece in the shop is my own design and construction. The beadwork is exquisite. Where did you learn this technique?" "From my mother originally," Tessa said. "She learned it from Apache women when she was young. I have been refining it over the years." Mrs. Hartford looked at her with new interest. "I have been looking for someone who could create a dress for my daughter's wedding. Something unique, not the same styles everyone orders from the catalogs. Would you be interested in taking on a commission?" Tessa's heart leaped, but she kept her voice calm and professional. "I would be honored. When is the wedding?" 3 months from now. Would that give you enough time?" "Absolutely. If you and your daughter would like to come in for a consultation, we can discuss designs and take measurements." By the time Mrs. Hartford left, Tessa had not only secured the wedding dress commission, but also sold 2 of her display pieces. She was practically vibrating with excitement when Keaton arrived at lunch. "We have orders," she announced, throwing herself into his arms. "Real commissions from real customers with real money. Mrs. Sarah Hartford wants me to make her daughter's wedding dress." Keaton laughed and spun her around, his own joy at her success evident in every line of his face. "I knew it would work. I knew people would recognize how talented you are." "It is just the beginning," Tessa said, but already she was imagining the possibilities. More commissions, a reputation building, perhaps eventually expanding to a larger space with apprentices to help with the workload. The business grew steadily over that first year. Tessa's unique designs and exceptional craftsmanship earned her a reputation among Tucson's society women, and soon she had more work than she could handle alone. She hired her first employee, a young woman named Maria who had skills but lacked the capital to start her own business. Together, they built Thornton Designs into one of Tucson's premier dressmaking establishments. Keaton, meanwhile, found that he enjoyed the balance of staying in one place while still taking on varied construction projects throughout the territory. He became known for his expertise in complex building challenges, and his insistence on safety standards influenced practices throughout the region. The nightmares that had plagued him since his sister's death gradually faded, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing he was making a real difference. Their second anniversary found them hosting a small dinner party at the house they had recently purchased, a modest but comfortable adobe structure with a workshop for Tessa and space for Keaton's tools and plans. Samuel Bridger was in attendance, along with Mrs. Vasquez, Maria and her new husband, and several other friends they had made in Tucson. "I want to propose a toast," Bridger said, raising his glass. "To Keaton and Tessa Easton, 2 people who remind me that integrity and hard work still matter in this world. You have both built something remarkable from very difficult beginnings, and I am proud to call you friends." "Hear, hear," Mrs. Vasquez agreed, dabbing at her eyes with her handkerchief. She had grown quite sentimental about the couple she had chaperoned, considering herself partly responsible for their happiness. After the guests had left and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes, Tessa paused and put a hand on Keaton's arm. "I have something to tell you," she said, suddenly nervous. "News, really." He set down the plate he was holding and gave her his full attention, his expression shifting to concern. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am fine. Better than fine, actually." She took a deep breath. "I am pregnant." The words hung in the air for a heartbeat before Keaton's face transformed with joy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, then immediately set her down again as if afraid he might hurt her. "Are you sure? When did you find out? How are you feeling?" "I am sure. I found out yesterday from the doctor, and I am feeling a bit queasy in the mornings but otherwise wonderful," Tessa said, laughing at his sudden nervousness. "You do not need to treat me like I am made of glass. I am perfectly healthy." "We are going to have a baby," Keaton said wonderingly. "I am going to be a father." "Are you happy about it?" Tessa asked, though his expression made the question somewhat redundant. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, pulling her close and kissing her thoroughly. "I cannot wait to meet this child, to teach them things and watch them grow, to give them the kind of safe, stable home I never had." "We will do it together," Tessa said softly. "Everything we never had, we will give to them." Their son was born the following spring, a healthy baby with his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Tessa's father, and he proved to be an easy, happy child who seemed to absorb the love surrounding him like sunshine. Tessa took a few months away from the shop after the birth, but Maria proved more than capable of managing things in her absence. By the time Thomas was 6 months old, Tessa was back at work part-time, bringing the baby with her and setting up a small nursery in the back room of the shop. Customers found the arrangement charming rather than unprofessional, and several brought small gifts for the baby when they came for fittings. Keaton proved to be a devoted father, rearranging his work schedule to ensure he could spend time with his son every day. He built Thomas a beautiful cradle and later a set of wooden toys that became the child's favorites. Watching him with their son, Tessa often thought about how far they had both come from that terrifying morning at the quarry. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not been there that day?" she asked one evening as they sat together watching Thomas sleep in his cradle. "If I had fallen, I try not to," Keaton admitted. "But sometimes I wake up from dreams where I am reaching for you and I am just a second too late. Those dreams still terrify me." "I am here," Tessa said, taking his hand. "We are both here and we are safe and we have built something wonderful together. The what-ifs do not matter anymore." "I know, but I am still grateful every single day that I happened to be climbing that platform at exactly the right moment. If the timing had been off by even a minute, everything would be different." "Then I am grateful too," Tessa said. "For timing, for your quick reflexes, for your stubborn insistence on doing the right thing even when it was inconvenient, for all of it." Their family grew over the following years. A daughter came next, Emma, with her mother's brown eyes and a determination that suggested she would be a force to be reckoned with. Then another son, James, who was quiet and thoughtful from the very beginning. Each child was welcomed with joy and raised with the kind of love and security Tessa and Keaton had both lacked in their own childhoods. The dress shop flourished, eventually expanding to a larger location with 3 employees working under Tessa's direction. She developed a specialty in wedding dresses, her unique designs sought after by brides throughout the territory. Several times, she was invited to Tucson's most prestigious social events, a sign of how far she had come from the desperate woman working in a dangerous quarry. Keaton built a reputation as the best structural engineer in southern Arizona, respected not only for his skills but for his uncompromising commitment to safety. He trained a generation of younger builders in proper techniques and safety protocols, and several quarries and mines throughout the region adopted his standards voluntarily. The documentation he had kept on Dutch Keller's violations became the foundation for new territorial safety regulations, saving countless lives over the years. On their 10th anniversary, Keaton took Tessa back to Gila Bend for the first time since they had left. The town had grown, and the quarry under William Chen's management had become a model of safe and efficient operations. They stood at the base of the cliff where it had all begun, looking up at the spot where Keaton had caught her. "I can barely remember being that person," Tessa said quietly. "The woman who was so desperate she would climb rotten platforms for a few dollars. It feels like a lifetime ago." "In a way it was," Keaton said. "We are not the same people we were then. We have grown and changed, built a whole life together." "Do you ever regret not taking Bridger's offer to run the quarry permanently? We could have stayed here, built our life in Gila Bend." "Never," Keaton said firmly. "Tucson was the right choice. It let us both pursue our dreams, build something from scratch that was entirely ours. And it was far enough from the memories of that time that we could move forward without constantly being reminded of how hard things were." Tessa leaned against him, comfortable and secure in a way she had never imagined possible during those dark days at the quarry. "I love you," she said simply. "For saving me, for believing in me, for building this life with me." "I love you too," Keaton said. "And I would do it all over again, every single moment, if it meant ending up here with you." They stood together for a while longer, remembering the fear and courage of that day, grateful for the paths that had led them to each other. Then they turned and walked back toward town, toward their waiting children and the life they had built together, leaving the past behind and embracing the future ahead. The years continued to pass with the gentle rhythm of a well-lived life. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who showed an aptitude for engineering like his father, spending hours at Keaton's side learning about structures and safety. Emma became a skilled seamstress, working alongside her mother and eventually taking over much of the day-to-day management of the dress shop. James discovered a passion for law and headed east for schooling, determined to use his education to help protect workers' rights. Keaton's hair turned gray at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that Tessa found endlessly attractive. Her own hair gained silver threads, but her hands remained steady and skilled, creating beautiful garments even as her responsibilities shifted more toward training and management. They celebrated 20 years together, then 25, each anniversary a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had built. On their 30th anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren at a celebration in the garden of their home, Tessa found a quiet moment alone with Keaton. "You remember the first thing you said to me?" she asked, taking his hand in hers. "I have got you," Keaton said immediately. "And I told you not to look down, to look at me instead." "You have kept that promise every day since," Tessa said softly. "You have always caught me when I was falling, always reminded me to look forward instead of down at the dangers below." "That works both ways," Keaton said, raising her hand to his lips. "You saved me just as much as I saved you that day. You gave me a reason to stop wandering, to build roots somewhere. You turned a lonely carpenter into a husband and father with a real home and a real life. You were my rescue, too." They sat together as the sun set over Tucson, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, surrounded by the laughter of their grandchildren and the warmth of family. It was not the ending either of them could have imagined during those desperate days in Gila Bend, but it was perfect in its quiet happiness. "Thank you," Tessa said, though she was not entirely sure what she was thanking him for saving her life, for loving her, for building this beautiful existence with her. Perhaps it was all of those things and more. "Always," Keaton replied, understanding as he always did. "For as long as we both shall live, I have got you." And he did, just as he had promised, until they were both old and gray and still holding hands, still looking at each other instead of down, still grateful every single day for the chance encounter that had changed everything. The quarry foreman had forced her to work dangerous heights, but a cowboy had pulled her down and given her a safer life, and in doing so, he had given them both something neither had dared to dream of before that fateful morning: love, safety, home. A future filled with joy instead of fear, with hope instead of desperation. It was everything, and it was enough. And when they finally passed within months of each other in their old age, they left behind a legacy of children and grandchildren who carried forward their values of integrity, courage, and unwavering devotion to those they loved. The story that had begun with a scream on a crumbling platform ended with quiet peace in a sun-warmed garden. Two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment and built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate tragedies. It was a simple tale in many ways, a story that could have been told in a few sentences. But in the living, in all the small moments and major milestones, in the daily choice to keep loving and building and believing, it became something extraordinary. Emma eventually found her mother's old journals, written during those early years in Tucson when everything was still new and uncertain. In them, Tessa had recorded not just the events of each day but her thoughts and feelings, her wonder at the unexpected path her life had taken. One entry, dated a year after they married, stood out to Emma as she read through the faded pages. "I think about that day at the quarry often, even though part of me wishes I could forget the terror of it. But I cannot wish away that moment, because it brought Keaton into my life. He says he just happened to be in the right place at the right time, but I believe it was something more than chance. We needed each other, two broken people finding wholeness together. He pulled me from physical danger that day, but over time we have both pulled each other back from so many other edges: loneliness, grief, fear of the future. We are stronger together than either of us ever was alone, and I am grateful beyond measure for every moment we have." Emma shared the journal entry with her father during one of their weekly dinners, now that her mother had been gone for 3 months, and Keaton was living with her and her family. He listened with tears in his eyes, then smiled. "Your mother always had a way with words," he said softly. "She was right, you know. We did need each other and we were stronger together. I miss her every day." "She missed you too at the end," Emma said gently. "She kept asking for you even when you were sitting right beside her holding her hand. I know, the fever made her confused." Keaton looked out the window at the sunset, so similar to the thousands of sunsets he had watched with Tessa over their years together. "But I was there. I kept my promise. I never let go." Emma squeezed her father's hand. This man who had loved her mother so completely, who had built a life and a family from a single moment of courage on a dangerous cliff face. The love between her parents had been the foundation of her childhood, the standard against which she measured her own marriage, the legacy she hoped to pass on to her own children. "Tell me again," she said, as she had asked him to do many times over the years. "Tell me the story of how you and Mother met." And Keaton, now aged but still with those striking blue eyes, smiled and began the tale once more. "Your mother used to say it started with a scream, but I always thought it really began the moment our eyes met, and I knew, absolutely knew, that I would not let her fall." He talked long into the evening, remembering every detail of that day and all the days that followed, keeping the story alive for another generation. And in the telling, Tessa lived again, vibrant and real, the desperate woman who became a successful businesswoman, the frightened girl who became a devoted wife and mother, the unlikely love that transformed two lives completely. It was, after all, a story worth remembering. A story of courage and second chances, of choosing love in the face of fear, of two people who met at the worst possible moment and made it the beginning of the best possible life. A story that proved that sometimes, when you are falling, the right person will be there to catch you, and everything that comes after will be worth every moment of terror that came before. And as the stars came out over Tucson, and Emma sat with her father in the gathering darkness, listening to the familiar words of a tale she had heard dozens of times, she thought about legacy and love and the ways we save each other, sometimes in dramatic moments of danger and sometimes in the quiet persistence of daily devotion. Her parents had done both, and in doing so, they had created something that would outlast them both: a family, a story, a reminder that hope can be found even in the darkest places, and that sometimes the fall that terrifies us is actually the first step toward flying. Keaton lived another 5 years after Tessa's passing, surrounded by children and grandchildren who cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown them. When he finally closed his eyes for the last time, it was with a smile on his face and Tessa's name on his lips, ready to take her hand once more. They buried him beside her in the Tucson cemetery, under a headstone that read simply, "Keaton Easton, beloved husband and father, he never let go." And in the years that followed, as their children told the story to their grandchildren, and those grandchildren told it to their own children, the tale of the Quarry Foreman and the Cowboy, and the woman caught between them, became something more than just family history. It became a reminder that in every generation, there are people who choose courage over convenience, who reach out to help strangers, who build lives of meaning from moments of crisis. The quarry outside Gila Bend still operates, now with safety standards that would have seemed impossibly strict to Dutch Keller and his contemporaries. A small plaque in the office commemorates Keaton Easton's contributions to worker safety throughout the territory. The dress shop in Tucson, now run by Emma's daughter, still bears the name Thornton Designs, still creates beautiful garments using techniques passed down through 3 generations. And sometimes, when the wind blows just right through the canyons outside Gila Bend, people swear they can hear the echo of an old story, a tale of a scream and a reaching hand and 2 lives that intersected at precisely the right moment to save each other. It is a good story, a true story, and like all the best stories, it reminds us that in our darkest moments, help might be closer than we think. All we have to do is reach out, hold on, and trust that someone will catch us when we fall. Keaton caught Tessa that spring morning in 1883, and in doing so, he caught himself as well, pulling them both back from edges they had been approaching for years. Together they built something lasting, something beautiful, something worth celebrating and remembering. And that, in the end, is what love really is. Not just the dramatic rescues and grand gestures, though those have their place, but the daily choice to keep holding on, to keep building together, to face whatever comes with courage and compassion, and an unwavering commitment to the person you chose and who chose you in return. Tessa and Keaton understood this. They lived it every day of their long marriage, from that first terrifying morning to the last peaceful evening, and they left behind a legacy that reminds us all that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and that love, real love, is always worth fighting for. The story ends as all stories must, but the love continues in the lives they touched, and the family they created, and the example they set for everyone who knew them. It continues in the safe working conditions that bear Keaton's influence and the beautiful dresses that reflect Tessa's artistry. It continues in the memory of 2 people who met by chance and stayed together by choice, who built a life worth living from the fragments of their separate sorrows. And on quiet evenings in Tucson, when the desert sun sets in brilliant colors and the air cools with the promise of night, you can almost see them still, walking hand in hand through their garden, gray-haired and content, still looking at each other with the same wonder they felt that first day, still grateful for the timing that brought them together, still in love after all these years, still holding on as they always had, as they always would, until the very end and beyond. That is the story of Tessa Thornton and Keaton Easton, the woman who was forced to work dangerous heights and the cowboy who pulled her down and gave her something better. It is a story of rescue and romance, of courage and commitment, of two people who found in each other everything they had been missing. And it is a true story, in all the ways that matter most.